good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, and also good morning, depending on your time zone. So thank you again for joining the CCAPPTIA conference, day 2. And so in the following session, Dr. Jason Monios will be the chair of this session. But before then, let me just do some very quick housekeeping. And so again, thank you very much for joining the conference, and I hope that you will enjoy the conference today and also tomorrow. And so there are a few things. Number one is that this morning we have again updated the conference program a little bit, and so all of you should be able to see the latest conference program, which is already uploaded on the chat box. So you can download the file from the chat box. That is the most updated program. At the same time, you can also go to the conference website to upload the updated program. And also another thing is that I think like yesterday's practice, what we are going to do is that today it will be divided into, again, 2 sessions, and then there will be a break in this session. Just before the break, it will be the time for us to take a group photo for the day. So so at that time, so when Jason start to say that that is the end of the first session, and then can everyone please switch on your screen and take a group photo. Hope that all of you will be able to switch on the screen, and then we can take a group photo. And also, finally, we have 10 speakers today. And in fact, including a break, the schedule is that we try to complete everything within around 3 hours or so. So it's actually a little bit tight. So it will be very grateful if I can remind all the speakers that as much as possible, please try to restrict your presentation within 15 minutes. And hopefully that we will also have at least a little bit of time for some Q&A and discussion. Finally, for all the speakers, the Zoom setting has been set up in a way that all of you will be able to share your screen. So when it's your turn to do the presentation, please feel free to share your screen and then present your PowerPoint presentation or present anything that you would like to share with us. So may I first ask, in this case, are there any questions regarding the arrangements? Okay, so if that is the case, then I think what I would do is that let's start our conference today, and I will give the floor to Jason, who is the chair of this session. Jason, thank you.
Thanks, Adolf. Thanks, everybody. So yes, first I'd just like to join Adolf in welcoming you all here today. For those of you who were here yesterday, welcome back. And for those joining for the first time, welcome to today. As Adolf mentioned, it's a 3-day conference. So each one is on a different time zone, but we've staggered the time zones so that people should still be able to join from different continents without too much of a time difference. Adolf pretty much gave you an overview of the day, of the issues for today. So particularly number 1 is the photo taking. So when we get to the end, I'll remind you about that. In fact, I think what I'll do quickly, we've just got a couple of minutes, I'll share the program with you. So see, we've got the welcome remarks now. We've got a few more minutes for that, which should be perfect. And then, well, as we say in football, it's a game of 2 halves. So I'm doing the first half. We probably shouldn't mention the football, given what happened to France last night. The less said about that, the better. So I'll be taking us up to the break, 2:30 for the. But first, before you all rush up and have a coffee, we'll do the photo taking. I'll ask you to turn your screens on or your cameras on. We'll do the photo taking, and then we'll have a break, and then Yufeng will take over for the second half. So in our first half, we have 5 speakers. I'll give a very quick introduction now to save time when the speakers are speaking. We're very pleased. We're going to start with Regina Asariotis from UNCTAD. She's done a lot of very important work in the field of climate change adaptation by ports. So I think having her as the first presentation will really explain and introduce what's going on and what the issues are that many of the speakers will then be talking about today. So we think that will be an excellent first presentation to really set the scene for the topic today. And then next we'll have my friend and colleague from Kedge Marseille, Laurent Fedi. He's going to talk about the disruptions of COVID and how it's been affecting the crew changes. So it's going to be a very interesting practical discussion of what's going on really at the sharp end of operations in the shipping sector. Then we're going to have Theo Notteboom. I'm sure all of us here know Theo very well. He doesn't need any introduction. He's going to be talking about how COVID has been impacting on the strategies in the shipping industry, particularly in terms of mergers. You know, we've seen a lot of M&A activity after the previous crisis in 2008, and now Theo's going to talk about how the new crisis is potentially going to cause similar changes in terms of horizontal and vertical integration. Then we're going to have Zaili Yang from Liverpool John Moores. Again, Zaili is really the #1 guy when it comes to resilience and fuzzy decision-making and these kind of risk and resilience analysis and decision-making, how to make decisions in these uncertain, when the future is uncertain, well, what strategies should you choose? So Zaili is going to present the latest work he's been doing on that. And finally, for our first half of the day, we have Naima Saeed from University of Agder in Norway. I think this is going to be interesting and very up to date because it's not just talking about COVID, but we're talking about the Suez Canal. And, you know, a few months ago, everyone was talking about the Ever Given and everyone was on the news and suddenly maritime was everywhere. So it's going to be very interesting to hear Naima's thoughts about that and how that relates to COVID. So as you can see from all the presentations, we're talking about disruption and resilience today. Of course, the CCAPPTIA consortium is about climate change, particularly as well as issues in the Arctic, and with a broader focus on these kind of resilience and disruption, and really how the next decades in maritime transport are going to be shaped by direct climate change impacts in terms of weather and sea level rises and storms and things like that, but also the indirect changes. They could be from weather causing droughts and crop failures, which will be causing migrations. There'll be coastal erosion, which is going to cause huge millions of hundreds of millions of people around the globe to migrate in the next decades. So all of these things are going to have very large direct and indirect impacts on ports and shipping. So that's climate change, it's resilience, it's risk. And COVID, you know, it's not specifically about climate change, but I would say it's very indicative of the same sorts of challenges we're going to see again in a few more years and in another decade and in another decade. These are the sort of things we're learning to deal with now. So I think by understanding what's going on with the COVID disruption right now, it's not just COVID, but we're learning more about how we deal with risk and resilience in the broader perspective. So I think that's enough for me. Just one final thing before I hand over to Regina. It's just to repeat what Adolf said. The presentations are 15 minutes. It's quite short and sweet. You know, we all have Zoom fatigue after this last year, so we don't need, 40-minute presentations per person. It's just to give a flavor, a short overview, so we can learn what our colleagues are doing and share knowledge and information, but without getting bogged down in, 10 hours of presentation. So if we have a minute or two for a quick question within the 15 minutes, I will do that. If not, we do at the end of the day, so at the end of the second part of right at the end of today, we have half an hour. So we'll have time for wrap up and discussion. That's in Yufeng will be managing that session, but we will have time for questions and discussions at the end of the day. So probably that's where we'll do most of the actual discussion. So as Adolf said, all of the speakers do have the sharing screen. I'll stop sharing my screen now. So all of the presenters do have the rights to share your screen. So when it's your turn, please just go ahead and use the share screen button at the bottom. I guess you're all familiar with that by now. So yes, without any further ado, I'd like to hand over, as I said, very pleased to have Regina with us today to kick off today's session. So when you're ready, please go for it.
Hello, everyone. First of all, a very good day to everyone online. It's a pleasure to be with you today. And thank you very much, Adolf and the CCAPPTIA team for the kind invitation. First of all, can you hear me and can you see me well?
Yes. No problem.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to share my screen. Despite what Jason just said, the main focus of my presentation today is going to be not so much on climate change, but on commercial implications of the COVID crisis. And this is with particular reference to the topic of the main theme of the conference. So I've entitled this some of the key commercial and other implications for maritime transport from a global perspective. And I'm with UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the focal point within the United Nations system for the integrated consideration of trade and development issues. Obviously, as part of our work over the last year, we're all in the same boat. Everybody is on a screen, not necessarily by choice. So we are all in that same situation. And that has, of course, given rise to a lot of engagement on our part as well, a lot of requests for assistance. So we've done quite a lot of work on this, and I'm going to share some of the insights. So to zoom in on maritime transport, it is the critical facilitator of global trade and development, because over 80% of the volume of world merchandise trade goes by sea from port to port, and shipping and ports link the network of closely interconnected international supply chains. So to keep the flow of goods moving, you need well-functioning supply chains. And globalization means we're all interconnected and interdependent. And in fact, in terms of developed and developing nations, seaborne trade, around 60% of all goods loaded and unloaded are in developing countries, which shows you again how closely knit this is. Now, there have been a broad range of socioeconomic and trade-related implications of the COVID pandemic and also of related response measures. And time doesn't permit me to go through all of these. I give you one small issue which has come up in a recent discussion of ours. For example, freight costs have grown dramatically. Now, for the shipping industry, that translates into a recovery of freight rates. But for those at the receiving end, for example, island nations, archipelagic states, small island developing states, this has led to a doubling of the cost of transportation for essential goods, and that's a big problem. So that is something that needs to be looked at. But I want to concentrate today particularly on two types of issues: seafarers and crew change issues from a global perspective, and commercial contracts and related claims. So seafarers and crew change issues, it's obvious that during the COVID pandemic, it's vital to ensure the shipments of food, medical supplies, fuel, and other essential goods, and to help keep supply chains open and global commerce running. We need to address the issue of seafarers and crew change in times of pandemic. And the second point is the private law implications of COVID. And there has been a relatively limited focus on this, but they're very important in practice. So to come to the first, seafarer and crew change issues. For some key developments, I've put a link up there for you as well to an article we wrote, and we will cover this also more in our review, in our upcoming review of maritime transport for this year, 2021. Also in last year's edition, we have covered this. So to ensure food security, medical supplies, essential goods, and to also harness the economic benefits from a growth in e-commerce, it's important that physical supply chains are secured in a coordinated way. Recommendations and guidance have been issued both by governments and also organizations, intergovernmental and non-governmental, so industry associations, to ensure that seafarers are protected from COVID, medically fit, have access to medical care, and that ships and port facilities meet international sanitary requirements. Yet, I have to say on this one, I've noted with concern a report in about a week ago in the mainstream media about the incidence of a vessel where the ship's captain came down with COVID symptoms on the second day. No medical assistance could be provided. The captain finally died on board after 10 days, and the crew was stranded at sea for 6 weeks with the unable to land either the deceased captain of the ship or to do anything because no port would let them in. So this is a sort of illustrative of the type of issues that arises, where I don't want to emphasize now the trade-related implications, but the human and public health considerations. So this is obviously something where something more needs to be done in practice. But to come to the broader picture, so border closures and lockdowns and other preventative measures, which are absolutely necessary for public health, have resulted in hundreds of thousands of seafarers stranded at sea, far beyond the expiration of their contracts. And that, of course, has prompted calls by international organizations, including ours, and also IMO, of course, ILO, and industry bodies and governments to urge states to designate seafarers and other marine personnel as key workers, accept relevant identity documents of that as evidence of that status, and allow some flexibility to divert ships to call in ports where crew change is possible. The General Assembly has occupied itself with this topic, which illustrates the critical nature of this to all global trading interactions. And the resolution is called International Cooperation to Address Challenges Faced by Seafarers as a Result of COVID-19 to Support Global Supply Chains. So the nexus is very clear in the title. And that urges states to designate seafarers as key personnel and implement relevant IMO protocols for ship crew safety and public health. And governments are called upon to facilitate maritime crew changes. In response or echoing these calls, the Neptune Declaration has been signed by over 600 companies and organizations, recognizing their shared responsibility in this. And as of the end of May, 62 IMO member states and associate member states had signed on to designate seafarers as key workers. So there is some movement in that direction. We have, excuse me, UNCTAD has been asked as part of the UN General Assembly resolution to report on relevant developments as part of the upcoming annual review of maritime transport, which will come out, I think, in early November. So we will do that. And at the end of my presentation, I've added some further sources with hyperlinks to further information. Now, if we switch over now and consider some of the commercial law implications. Bird's eye perspective, it's quite obvious that the unprecedented disruptions that are associated with the pandemic and the response measures give rise to a plethora of legal issues affecting individual traders across the globe. Of course, we are all interconnected, and cross-border interactions based on contracts is the norm. The effects may lead to business losses and bankruptcies at a large scale, and in addition, overwhelm courts and legal systems. That in turn would have implications for governance and the rule of law. So this is a quite disconcerting state of affairs. What are we talking about specifically? In all cases where contractual performance is disrupted, delayed, or impossible, legal consequences arise. And that means they have to be resolved, need for dispute resolution or litigation, and jurisdictional issues in a globalized context. To reduce the incidence of disputes and facilitate their resolution, it's very important that common and collaborative approaches be adopted. And that is both true for governments and for industry. So on the industry side and on the side of individual traders, it's going to be important to consider favorably contractual extensions, show restraint in pursuing legal rights and claims, and pursue efforts at mediation and informal dispute resolution. Also, especially looking forward, it will be important to devise commercial risk allocation clauses, so standard form clauses which allocate as between two contracting parties the financial risk associated with this, with a set of circumstances which is beyond the control of both parties. This is done in the context, for example, of safety and security. So here, there's a lot of scope. The main ship owner organizations have already started, but of course, there are always two sides to a commercial transaction. So it's very important that everybody gets involved in considering these types of clauses. Additional considerations arise from a greater reliance on electronic trading. And of course, everybody sees the benefits of electronic interaction, and that's very, very important. There's great potential economically and to facilitate, to cut down physical interactions, for example. But there are always two sides to a coin, so this is also fraught with some problems. E-commerce is already and is continuing to grow significant, but all the e-commerce transactions for goods need to be performed in the real world. And that means while the pandemic is going on, and as things look now, the measures and the response measures will be needed for some time to come. This is going to be a challenge to keep the physical supply chains open and uninterrupted. But the more we interact electronically and virtually and online, the more the risk of cyber attacks increases. And that increases vulnerabilities across the globe, again, for potentially crippling, with the potential for potentially crippling effects on supply chains and services. And you will recall the recent attacks on the oil pipeline on the US East Coast is just a type of issue that can arise when you have cyber attacks. So it's really critical that in response to the pandemic, coordinated efforts are pursued to protect against cybercrime and to scale up investment capacity building, institutional and human capacity building in this respect. So this is specifically on these two types of issues. We're engaged in a multi-agency technical assistance project, which runs until next March. Includes a number of components. The link is available to the project as a whole, a number of components, including one on key commercial law implications. And we have already published 2 substantive briefing notes, namely implications for international sale of goods on CIF and FOB terms, and another one on implications for carriage of goods and related cargo claims. We have further training and capacity building and 2 additional analytical reports in preparation. I encourage you, if you're interested in this, to have a look at the project website and also at the publications. So these are the 2. This is a picture here, the only one so far. And here are some links also to a policy brief. And before I close, I'm going to switch over to climate change. Now, how am I making this link? As Jason Monios said in his introduction, COVID really should be seen as a cautionary tale. It really does illustrate the effect of disruption on supply chains and the extensive economic costs and broader trade-related implications once these disruptions arise. It also underlines, therefore, the critical importance of risk assessment, preparedness, and resilience. So we should draw lessons from that in all areas of interaction. But in relation to climate change, this is particularly urgent because climate change adaptation for global ports and other key transport infrastructure, which, as I mentioned at the outset, underpins a global trade and is absolutely key, is becoming an increasingly urgent challenge. There are high and growing risks, particularly associated from mean sea level rise and associated extreme sea level rise, and very recent indications about melting of the Arctic melting in the Antarctic ice sheets, which is accelerated from 2060, could mean that the mean sea level rise is going to be more than double than what we have so far. So that could be very problematic. And I have put here also a link to a Guardian report, a newspaper report about a Swiss reinsurance study, where the headline is the climate crisis is going to shrink the G7 economies twice as much as COVID if the temperatures rise by 2.6 degrees by 2050. And we're well on track for this. We're at the moment well on track for over 3 degrees by the end of the century and 1.5 degrees from about 2030. So none of this stops. And as I say at the beginning of this slide, COVID really tells us and shows us how important it is to think ahead so as to minimize disruption. And that means for climate change adaptation for critical transport infrastructure like ports and other key nodes. Very important because these infrastructure assets are both critical, but they also have long lifespans that we need early climate risk and vulnerability assessments and foster early long-term planning to enhance resiliency and building back better. And I'm going to finish with this slide, which is from some work which we've done in collaboration with the JRC, European Commission's Joint Research Center on the modeling. We looked at extreme sea levels under climate change for 3,700 global ports. So this is GIS based. On the top panel, what you can see is at the moment, the 1 in 100 years extreme event, which is a standard design parameter for port construction and defense. What the extreme sea levels have been over a reference period, which is 1986 to 2014. And you can see that it is highest, this is in meters on the top left, it is highest in the macrotidal environments across the globe. Now, the other 3 panels, they don't show you meters. What they show you is how much more frequently something that so far is expected to arise once in 100 years is expected in the future. So under the 1.5 degree scenario, which is, as I mentioned, practically next Wednesday, to be expected to be reached in the 2030s, very, very soon, you can see that many global ports, red is bad in this one, that many global ports have to fear the baseline 100 year extreme sea level events as often as once a year or several times a year. And that, of course, grows as the heat projections progress. And at 3 degrees, it's basically red everywhere, as you can see. That means what is now a 100 year event would be more than once a year. So this doesn't tell us yet what the then 1 in 100 year event will be. It's going to be obviously higher, but it just illustrates what a great need there is to prepare. And this is just a snapshot about sea level rise. Of course, the same goes for example, heat extremes and others. So with that, I'm going to leave it in the interest of time. Thank you very much for your attention. I have put some additional sources, as I mentioned, for crew change issues and seafarers here. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your timekeeping. Perfect. I don't think we have any time for questions right now. We'll have to keep them for the end of the session, but anyone who likes to can either hold on to your questions or write them in the chat. But yeah, I think that was a very, very strong finishing point there about how do you plan for something that's once in every 100 years if it comes every year? It's just, how can ports make these huge investments with that kind of forecast? It's shocking, frankly, very difficult. Thank you.
That's true, but I don't want people to be left with the impression that it's necessarily be costly. Very often, small design changes make a huge difference, and of course, planning, just putting your mind to some measures to reduce the risk. So not to leave them with the idea that you need only massive infrastructure investment, risk assessment and monitoring.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to our second presenter, my friend Laurent Fedi from works with me at Cage Marseille. Do you have can you upload your slides?
Can you see my
Excellent.
screen?
Yes, looks good.
Perfect.
So whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank you, Jason and Adolphe, of course, for inviting me to participate in this great conference. So in line with what Regina Asariotis presented, I'm going to talk about crew changes and the COVID-19 crisis, with a specific focus on French ship owners and how they handle this very particular crisis. So I've divided my presentation into 5 main parts. After a short introduction, I will present the research methodology. After our preliminary results, the key lessons, what we learned from our study, and I will draw some conclusions. Well, this communication is based on 2 publications, and the main one is what I did with two colleagues, French lawyers, maritime lawyers, Alexandre Charbonneau and Patrick Chaumet, and we published this paper dealing with occupational health, crew changes, social dialogue, and maritime employment, experience feedbacks on crisis management of the COVID-19 in a French legal review, Droit maritime français, in last September. So as Regina recalled, the COVID-19 has had enormous impacts all around the world. And obviously, crews and seafarers have paid a heavy price in the outbreak. And according to the International Transport Workers Federation, roughly 25% of seafarers was kept on board more than 10 months. Let me remind you that shipping represents around 2 million of seafarers. Most numerous are Filipino, Chinese, Indian, and Indonesian. We've got 600,000 European seafarers. Modestly, 6,000 are French. And in average, 50,000 are relieved every week. In September 2020, you have to know that more than 400,000 seafarers were stranded on ships and required immediate repatriation, while in March 2021, 2,000 seafarers needed this repatriation. So the aim of this research was simple. Firstly, to taking stock of the main impacts of the COVID-19 on crew changes for French ship owners. And secondly, providing a critical analysis of the key adaptation strategies implemented in response to this worldwide pandemic. And we had two research questions. The first one was what solutions French ship owners set up to address the COVID-19 outbreak, and secondly, what difficulties they faced. So let's turn our attention to the research methodology. Very simply, it's a qualitative research. France was our case study, and we carried out this research with different entities, public and private, the French Maritime Affairs, unions, shipping companies. We had roughly 20 interviews, 10 interviews per researcher, and my part was focused on the private sector, with a focus on bulk, offshore, container liner shipping, and cruise segment, and especially with the CMA CGM, Manfred, Ponant Company, Bourbon Offshore, and Louis Dreyfus Company, Armateur. What about our preliminary results? To sum up, the first message from ship owners was the numerous uncertainties that they have to handle in this crisis, especially at the beginning, the lack of knowledge regarding the coronavirus. In France, we faced the shortage of masks and tests, and at a global level, the ongoing policy shifts. As Regina reminded at the beginning of presentation, all around the world, restrictions were put in place, and the French ship owners, of course, mentioned the different issues related to visa requirements, the closed borders, the flight cancellation, the reduced frequencies regarding flight and train. And the third message addressed by the French ship owners was the daily management of the COVID-19 crisis, with an unstable and volatile regulatory framework, and finally leading to a tricky adaptation and anticipation measures. It was very difficult for them to anticipate because things moved every day. Regarding the different solutions that they have chosen and the different strategies they set up, I've chosen some examples. Firstly, especially for the container liner shipping, one of the key decisions was the establishment of a safe route, safe corridors between containment areas and ships. Obviously, as other companies all around the world, they have to set up a strict containment of seafarers between 8 and 40 days, plus the testing. Bourbon, for instance, for facilitating for ease the crew changes, they decided to have 3 crews per ship. In addition, CMA CGM established a call center with a psychological support available 40 hours a day and 7 days a week. Bourbon, for instance, decided to charter aircraft in order to repatriate crews. I could add that most ship owners, French ship owners, decided to increase the food supplies, internet access, and leisure time for crew members in order to improve their day-to-day. So it was a very short synthesis. Regarding the key lessons we learned, I would say that we can basically say that we observed negative outcomes and positive ones. Regarding the negative outcomes, obviously the question of the duration service period on board was higher than 6 months for French seafarers, while the French Transport Code states 6 months maximum. Obviously, compared to the MLC provision, that it's 11 months, it's really reasonable. Filipino seafarers on board on French ships had longer period, higher than 10 months. It was due to the specific situation of Philippines, especially, yes, limiting the repatriation of the seafarers. In addition, one observed extreme situations. For instance, Bourbon had to manage conflicts, fight on boards. In Namibia, 3 crews were stuck with supplies difficulties, and especially water, fresh water, food, and medicine as well. French ship owners underlined the lack of harmonization and non-respect of international and EU recommendations. Moreover, in the EU member states, why the Commission, the European Commission, provided recommendation regarding the management of seafarers, member states implemented different policies. For instance, in Germany, Louis Dreyfus Armateur pointed out that the legislation or the visa requirement was different depending on the lenders. So in the same country, the policies were different. Now, when we look at the positive outcomes, we can say that the French ship owners followed the IMO protocols and signed ITF agreements regarding the payment of wages of seafarers, insurance, food during the quarantine period, as well for accommodation. The French government provided a strong assistance to shipping sector as a whole and financial support as well, with especially in case of partial unemployment. We can say that the French ship owners consider the cruise fatigue, the stress and well-being. It's something that I felt. It was clearly showed in our survey. And the relationships between shipowners and seafarers improved. Closer relationship, personalized relationship with crew members, instead passing through the master. Okay, so now we understood that the French shipowners decided to get in touch, directly get in touch with their crew members individually. And interesting element as well, we observed that a greater solidarity between French shipowners, for instance, they mutualized aircrafts for the repatriation of seafarers. So we can say that, yeah, we observed a kind of new paradigm of crew changes, especially the establishment of sanitary corridors for CMA, CGM, and MARFRET. The prevention measures that was mandatory, that is to say, wearing masks and compulsory testing, now are systematic and will continue in the future, while some uncertainties remain, especially regarding the variants, the vaccination priority, and the vaccination sites in French ports. In April, 40,000 French seafarers needed vaccination. So it leads me to my conclusion. Obviously, our survey confirmed the strategic role of seafarers during the COVID-19 crisis. They assured the functioning of shipping and its resilience. I invite you to look at the great paper by Theo Notteboom, Palis and Rodrigue, Disruptions and the Resilience in Global Container Shipping and Ports, the COVID-19 pandemic versus the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. These great researchers underline the shipping resilience during this pandemic, and of course, seafarers played a key role. Nevertheless, they faced difficult situations, physically and psychologically, on board and ashore. French shipowners explained some situations when a crew member knew a bad event in the family, died people, for instance, and how to bring support to the mariner that are really far away from his family. So yeah, obviously they faced difficult situations. French shipowners plead in favor of creation of hubs and corridors dedicated to crew changes. LDA, for instance, insisted on the necessity to create 5 or 6 international hubs in order to ease the crew changes between airports and port without any contact with people and without quarantine measures. They also mentioned the worries about the socio-economic impacts of the COVID on maritime employment, the risk of resignation, the loss of competency, the skills shortage, and the higher training costs for new entrants. So in order to conclude this presentation, there is one pending question that Regina underlined, the key worker status for seafarers. We know that the UN resolution was adopted, that there is, in addition, a joint statement from European Workers Federation and the European Community Shipowners Association recently in April to achieve the key worker status. It seems that there is no single agreed definition of what key worker means. Anyway, they propose a list of pandemic rights that should be applied. The travel without restrictions, the quarantine exemption, the medical treatment, the testing priority, and so on. IMO, of course, supports this recognition, but could go further, especially in line with his commitment in the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. And why not? Could be a good idea to go further than a simple encouragement to sign the UN resolution, that because at the time only 60 countries signed. And my idea could be that proposing the key worker status in the SOLAS convention, because it's a mandatory convention. It could be a good sign for the IMO, and it is my opinion, but I think it could be a good idea, because as I told you, the SOLAS online with the safety of life at sea is mandatory, and the fatigue, the stress linked to the COVID-19 crisis have a direct impact on the safety on board. So I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Laurent. That was absolutely fascinating, very deep and rich insights into what's really going on in the shipping world. I mean, we talk, unfortunately, it often tends to be the crisis moments when we actually pay attention to the hard work and difficult work that seafarers are doing every day around the world. So thank you very much for putting the spotlight on that and drawing some very relevant policy conclusions for that as well. It would be great, we could discuss that, but unfortunately time is getting away from us, so we need to move speedily on to Theo. And thank you, Laurent, for very nicely segueing by introducing Theo's work already before he leads us seamlessly into Theo's presentation. So please, Theo, when you're ready.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Good evening for those who are in Asia. Great to be here at this conference, second conference. Also, thanks for the introduction, Jason. I'm going to share my screen with you, and given the time constraints, I will immediately start. So I will be giving a talk about also COVID-19, impact of COVID-19 on the container shipping industry. I know there's been already a talk earlier today. Regina, she was talking about some implications, also Laurent, and I know tomorrow there will be some more discussions as well. I know my colleague Thanos Palis will also be presenting some of the outcomes of his work and also some of the joint work we have done. We have worked, well, everybody's working on COVID-19 these days, but I've also done some work together with some colleagues. We've published a paper already quite early in the process, and also have been involved in the barometer, impact barometer exercise for IPH, which resulted in 17 reports dealing with the impact of COVID-19 on world ports. And this exercise was based on a survey. So it gave us not only quantitative information, but also a lot of qualitative information on what was going on. So what I'm now going to talk about is a bit going beyond these two things. I will particularly be focusing on one of the players in the market, and that's the container shipping line. Container shipping lines have, of course, been very much affected, first in a negative and then in a very positive way by COVID-19. But it also clearly illustrates that whenever you face a crisis, there's a lot of rebalancing taking place in supply chains, rebalancing in terms of market power, but also in terms of who is going to generate revenues out of the situation. And it also means that you have to revise the choreography of global supply chains. And we see that that is not so easy, that you can have hiccups, but that is very difficult to have everybody working together to make sure that there is enough capacity in the market and that indeed supply chains are smooth and affordable, I would say, or at least the transportation part of it. The COVID-19 crisis is peculiar, especially in quite a number of aspects. First of all, and this is quite unique for an economic shock, is that it was initially a supply shock generated by the closure of factories in China. Later on, it became also demand shock, which is normal for any economic crisis. And then from June onwards, both supply and demand shocks started to interact more and more. And since September 2020, we see a lot of divergence also on how COVID-19 is impacting local economies, but also is impacting specific ports. You have seen the reports of some ports being heavily affected by congestion, while other ports seem to have no specific problems. So there seems to be quite a bit of divergence in how these impacts spread out geographically and among different ports and players. Another quite peculiar thing is that during COVID-19, we saw an increased demand for durable goods, which is very special and very strange, because normally during economic crisis, the first thing people do is buy less durable goods. But since we were all in a lockdown situation, we started to buy more durable goods, more home furniture, more office equipment, and so on and so on. Another thing which is quite interesting is that we ended up being in a kind of perfect storm, in the sense that we had already the issue of capacity shortages since the summer, box availability issues, then we had some other issues. I think somebody's microphone is on.
Oh, Monios. Okay, I'll go check that place out.
Yes, I don't know where that's coming from. Let's see if I can mute everybody.
We have interference. I don't see it either. So
how's that?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of perfect storm. We had, of course, the availability, container box availability issues, vessel capacity is in short, is of course not there or not enough. And then we had other incidents with, for example, a situation in southern China, situation with the Suez Canal and so on. And on top of that, of course, then everybody's then looking to the shipping lines and blaming the shipping lines. You're not doing enough in order to bring enough capacity in the market. But the problem is all the capacity that is available is already sailing. And so you're basically dealing with I would say a surprising shock in terms of inventory restocking and increased consumer confidence that led to more demand. And as already mentioned before by Regina, is that this is a kind of unique situation. We've never been in this situation before, particularly in modern economic times, and nobody knows how you get out of this situation. And therefore, I included here a recent quote by Søren Shaw, who is the CEO of Maersk Line, basically saying, we don't know what's going to happen. We try to do the best on how to get out of this mess, but we don't know exactly what's going to happen. Of course, there's been a lot of impact on the networks as well. A year ago, we were talking about blank sailings. That was the hot topic in April, May, and June of 2020. We also saw a lot of interesting shifts between different transportation modes, rail, long-distance rail, China, Europe, for example, versus air freight versus container shipping. There were a lot of disruptions in inland logistics and transportation, partly caused by also all these restrictions on workers and so on, and border crossings. We also saw, in some cases, changes in route choice. I'm currently working with Pierre Cariou on a paper, particularly looking on how route choice has changed in terms of covering the North American market. And there's been some other impacts as well, such as the rise of e-commerce. Now, as I already told you, there's been quite a bit of impacts in recent months, and these have been caused by an enormous peak in demand. Now, we often still refer to the Suez Canal blockage, but in my view, the Suez Canal blockage was, of course, at that time, a major incident, but it eased out very, very fast, and it will be just a very small wave or ripple effect on the global container shipping business. So it doesn't have a long-lasting effect. More structural are the congestion problems in ports like LA Long Beach, recent issues in southern China. So there we see the impact taking not only a few days, but actually spreading out over many, many months, even half a year in case of LA Long Beach. And what's also problematic, of course, is the huge impact these congestion issues had on schedule reliability, very poor schedule reliability, historically poor. And not only do we have a low schedule reliability, we also have vessels delaying for more days. So instead of just having delays of 2, 3, or 4 days, we see vessels coming in on average 6, 7 days late. So this is quite exceptional and also never seen before. You have to go back to the early 2000s to see similar hiccups. And obviously also ports have been tested as well. If you, for example, look at LA or Long Beach, you can see that in 1 year time, the volumes have increased significantly. So first they were confronted with a huge decline in volume. That was in early 2020. And then now they are facing, of course, a steep rise in demand, leading to record volumes being handled by those ports. So also that tests the resilience of the terminal operators and also tests the availability of staff and so on in order to man all those terminals. Now going to the carriers, there is a very interesting difference between the financial crisis and the current crisis. Financial crisis was detrimental to the financial performance of the carriers. So they all performed very badly, I would say. And if you look today, you can see that the shipping lines are making record profits. In the first quarter of 2021, and the average operating margin was 38%, which is incredible. And so that is already a very marked difference between 2009 and now. And then a lot of people also focusing on the alliances and on shipping lines themselves, and also asking for regulatory action against the existing alliances. But I think you should also consider whether there are still benefits to the members of an alliance themselves. I think that's also a kind of evaluation you have to make. And there are benefits, but there are also drawbacks. And what we have seen in other industries is that alliances work very well as long as the situation in the market is quite depressed, so that you are dealing with the depressed market environment. But as soon as the financial performance goes up and the market looks much better, you often see that these alliances are under pressure. And so the question could be, will, in the end, shipping lines start to consider these alliances as redundant and say, yeah, now we are big enough in our own and we don't need partners anymore to develop our business further. Or maybe some of them might say, listen, we have been in this alliance for a long time. Let's now go for a merger instead of keeping the joint capacity management option open. In terms of the freight rates, as another one of the big debates, the freight rates have been going up significantly. They are still going up. If you look at, for example, the composite Shanghai containerized freight index, it has a record high at a record high at this moment. And of course, there will be a time that it will go down again. But a lot will depend, of course, on how also the shipping lines are adjusting their revenue management, their pricing engines, and also what's in the order books in terms of new ships entering the market and when these ships are going to enter the market. And there we know from experience from the past that if there are peaks in the container business or in any shipping market, that they are often short-lived. And that by the time all the ordered ships enter the market, you're already beyond the peak. And then you often enter a longer period of rather depressed and weak market conditions. And so if you would follow this scenario also for this, for the current container market, that would mean that by late 2022, early 2023, we will see whether indeed we are going to follow this scenario, yes or no. And there are signs that we might end up having this scenario in the end. And so we are now very ecstatic about the situation in the market and the exceptional situation, but we have been in these kind of situations before a few times. I think one of the game changers now is that shipping lines are using the situation presented to them to strengthen their involvement in other activities, particularly in logistics. If you read about the strategy of Maersk Line or even CMA CGM, you will see that actually logistics, supply chain management is becoming the core business of these companies, no longer pure container shipping. And so this might be indeed a game changer for the longer term, and also implies that the container shipping activities will still be important, but will be a kind of will be subjected to the larger goal of becoming a large logistics service providers. So that's an interesting thing to follow. It's not true for all shipping lines. If you look at MSC, if you look at China COSCO ship group and so on, there you can see that still the shipping activity is still far more important than any other activities they have in their portfolio. And another question is what will happen with other companies? Because of course, if you're in a situation where the profits are extremely high, freight rates are extremely high, then you can get some other actors in the market with deep pockets, considering also to enter that market. And we should particularly look at e-commerce platforms like Amazon, Alibaba. They have deep pockets, they have money. So if they're sick and tired of the situation, they might enter the business. Might be that they start chartering some vessels and then slowly build up a network. But it could also be that the DHLs of this world might be doing the same. And there are already some companies doing this. If you look, for example, at the French company Bolloré, they have already entered into some charter agreements in order to secure capacity, vessel capacity for their own markets. So, concluding remarks, of course, we are witnessing some exceptionally good times for carriers. Well, at least from the financial side, maybe from the operational side, it's a bit a nightmare as well. But from the financial side, carriers are doing very well. And of course, the question is, how long will this last? It will surely not last forever. How fast it will disappear, this situation, depends on a lot of issues. First of all, there are the capacity issues, the current capacity issues. Recently at the IPH conference in Antwerp, Rodolfo Sade made a quite strong statement saying that the current capacity issues will last till after Chinese New Year 2022. So that means for another half year, we will be in this situation for sure. Of course, a lot will depend on the wave of vessels that will enter the market. And if you look at when vessels were ordered, the wave will start in late 2022 and will reach its peak by the summer of 2023. So that will have a huge impact on the market as well. And obviously on the demand side, a lot will depend on how effective economic recovery programs are going to be and whether or not we will see some kind of nearshoring and regionalization of trade taking place. On the market structure side, there are also some comments to be made. In terms of horizontal integration, I think we will not see a new M&A wave in the market very soon, but I consider alliances to be under scrutiny for quite a while, not only by regulatory authorities, but also by some major shipping lines who will try to revisit alliances as part of their broader, the role of alliances as part of their broader global logistics activities. From a vertical integration side, there we clearly see a paradigm shift with more and more companies going for logistics as their core business. Heavily supported by digitalization. And if you just zoom into what Maersk Line is doing or CGM is doing in terms of buying shares in startup companies and so on, then you will understand that indeed this is very, very important to them. And then last but not least, I already mentioned, this is not a closed business. There are some entry barriers to container shipping. But if you have deep pockets and if you have a lot of access to cargo, then any logistics company or e-commerce platform and so on can make the entry if they want to. And that might, of course, also be changing the business. And then last but not least, of course, whenever there is this kind of exceptional situation, you have a lot of people shouting regulation or the government should step in and we should have more regulation on ship sizes, on market structures and what have you. I think this is going to be an important theme for the coming years. I personally hope that intervention will not be too big, so that regulatory authorities are not going to create a kind of rigid market environment in which shipping lines can operate. That would not be good for the business. But it's sure that some intervention might occur at the level of the market structure, and obviously also, as we have seen already, at the level of ship emissions. That's it from my side. So if there are any questions later on, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Theo. Absolutely fascinating as always. So many things there we could discuss all afternoon, but unfortunately, in the interest of time, we need to keep moving along. But yes, if you're still with us at the end of the day, we'll have some time to discuss that. Thank you. So moving straight on to Zaili, are you ready for us? Yes, I see it's coming on the screen.
Okay. Hello. Good morning, good
Thank you.
afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's deeply my pleasure to be here today to give a talk about climate risk analysis in transportation, mainly from a modeling perspective. It contains 5 elements. The first is to understand how to describe climate risk, because it contains strong uncertainty elements for evaluating climate risks because of lack of data, because of the subjective judgments involved. So a second element is about to use some mainstream uncertainty theories to better justify the climate risk quantification and also to support the relevant climate adaptation decision-making. And then I use a few cases. Here, the case means the works that we apply those relevant models and theories to sort it out the climate risk analysis or climate adaptation decision-making in the different transport modes, including seaport, road, and rail. Before we draw a conclusion, we insert the fourth element regarding the freight transport network resilience facing climate change. So I think that in this conference in particular, and also the other research seminars and communication platforms, we have seen and understood the risk associated with climate change. It's not really about the climate risk. I think climate change surely brings us the risk and the opportunities. However, in the main sort of concerns, I think the human societies are still currently focusing more on the damages caused by climate change, as shown in the photo. Some typical ones, particularly from the UK perspectives, we see floodings, hurricanes, storms, heavy rains, heat waves for the rail, for instance. Therefore, there's not like theoretical methodologies and framework to support risk-based climate adaptation decision-making. The bottom figure, I would say, is quoted and cited from a European project called the Future City. From there, there are few elements, including track vulnerability. Here it mainly refers to the weakness in the physical systems. And then we need in the parallel understand what are the climate impact to those vulnerabilities. By combining the two elements together, we'll be able to assess the risks and opportunities. Again, at the same time, we try to explore adaptation options and measures. So by combining the climate risks and the cost relating to use the adaptation options and measures, we can make more so-called rational, cost-effective decision-making for the policymaking. So the second slide really regards how to describe the risk. Somebody doing risk really knows the risk is defined as a combination of the likelihood and the consequence. So basically bad things happened and how likely the bad things could happen. If we multiply together, we use objective data, the things will be very easier because risk subject itself is really for decision making, is an inherent element for supporting the safety decision. How to translate it in practice, we need to understand which risk is of a high priority, which risk should be a lower priority. So we would like to use the money to tackle the risk of high priority, as simple as it is. Therefore, in many risk studies, we come across different risk results like FN curves, frequency, and numbers of casualties to present the exactly we call the absolute risk estimate. If we have the data, things will be stopped there, as simple as it is. But because in many occasions, the risk data is very, very rare to obtain for various reasons. Therefore, there's a lot of subjective risk analysis. The typical one is presented as RPN from the failure mode effect analysis, where we introduce more parameters to describe risk. Apart from likelihood consequence, there's another parameter, P, stands for probability of consequence. Interpreted in practice, something like the likelihood of an airplane drop from the sky is 10 to the power minus 6, 1 out of millions, and the consequence could be everyone on board will be killed by that. However, there's another parameter like probability of consequence meeting some survivabilities from the airline accidents. Occasionally, we come across somebody who survived from the accidents. So here, what we want to say is, in order to better describe the risk of different types, we need really to tailor the common risk parameters and some additions fit in that particular research context. Keep that concept in mind. For the climate risk, we initially proposed 3 risk parameters: time frame, how soon a climate risk will appear; likelihood, if it appears, how often that will affect our everyday life; and third one is C, severity of the consequence. If the bad things happen, how serious it will affect our everyday life. So that's for the general description of the climate risk. And if we move to the second half of the slides, we have a new definition for risk. Apart from consequence likelihood, there are more parameters we call it uncertainty. The SOE stands for strength of evidence, /BK stands for background knowledge. So in many occasions, no matter it's objective data or subjective data, it needs to be interpreted in a better way to present and describe risk. In order to tackle those strengths of evidence, we come across 3 main uncertainty series to deal with risk uncertainties, including fuzzy logic. Here, I will focus on the fuzzy rule-based analysis. Damascus theory, we use a particular algorithm called the evidence reasoning, and the Bayesian probability, mainly with the graph technology for Bayesian network. Very quickly for quantification of climate risk, as I mentioned that if we have data, things will become easier. If we don't, shall we leave the risk untouched? The answer is no. So we will rely on domain experts, and they are really helpful to prioritize the risk in the condition where we can't find the risk parameter data to quantify them. The first technology is called fuzzy rule-based. Here I use T for the time frame. If the time frame is very short, meaning next month, next week, a particular climate threat could happen. Likelihood is very high. If it happens constantly or once every day, every hour. And the consequence is catastrophic. If it happens, the whole transport network is blocked, is affected, then the climate risk is high. As explained later, if we have data perfect, if we don't, we still need to prioritize the risk. So we can tell decision maker, if you have certain measures, you have certain money, you do need to invest to that particular area of high risk. So the fuzzy really means we can't really clearly present how likely, how soon a risk can happen. Similarly, for the evidential reasoning, it's deal with another type of uncertainty called the incompleteness. Once we ask expert to evaluate saying how good they think a person is, he think this person is good, but I don't have 100% confidence to say it. I only have 80%, 90%. For the others, I'm not sure. So to deal with that, I give an example. For instance, in the middle part of the slides, when flooding risk is evaluated as 90% high and 10% very high, 10% high. Once the hurricane in a particular port, the risk is 90% very high and 10% high. The sea level rise risk is 90% very high and 10% unknown. How could we combine those input data together to generate a rational and a scientific value to guide climate adaptation? Somebody may say the average will mean something, but after thousands of experiments, I think that the evidential reasoning who can combine the subjective estimation with incompleteness in a more scientific way, the result is self-explanatory. It won't be something like average 90%, is higher than 90% because if more evidence to support the hypothesis becomes next to the truth or nearer to the truth. And the Bayesian is really to demonstrate or sort out another type of uncertainty we call the randomness. It means that so many influencing factors being together to influence the risk and in a dynamic way. So while I'm talking this time, the risk on the road, particular road, the risk may be very small. Soon after, minutes later, start raining, the roads become dark, and then the risk level will increase. So in order to model risk, the randomness should be taken into account as well. So what do we do by applying those three mainstream uncertainty theory in climate risk? We start with this study back to about 10 years ago, I think, 2012. Was lucky to meet a few colleagues, including Adolf. We were talking about how to quantify the risk to support adaptation. At that time, I think our knowledge in the domain was also at a lower level. So we start with a basic fuzzy calculation, not using the ones, the rule-based one. We use a fuzzy decomposition. Again, we take into account all the three parameters, and the result was good. However, the result certainly has a strong limitation, which is about its capability of dealing with big data. We had demonstrated the feasibility of the model, and we rank all the climate risk with respect to a particular selected port. So that is fine. But nowadays, if we're dealing with increasing number of climate rise, if we're dealing with these issues beyond one port scale to 10, 100, or 1,000 levels, obviously we need to improve our modeling capability. So I think 2 years later, after a massive effort from international team collaboration, we have collected a lot of data from a global survey, and we fit it into a fuzzy rule base, which I have explained, an evidential reasoning model to rank the climate risks across different ports from different continents. And also we incorporate the cost estimation to preliminary rank which adaptation measure could be feasible for solving out the outstanding climate risks that had been identified. In the slide, I provide some definitions. Once we come to the expert will feel very struggling to tell us how likely a climate risk could happen. It's just similar to the question, if we ask a human being, what's the temperature of the room? It will be very struggling for him to tell us it's 18 degree or 19 degree. After all, we are no machine. However, we do use linguistic terms such as warm, cold, cool. And then these linguistic terms can really help formulate based on the fuzzy algorithm. Here, I didn't really attach all the mathematical calculations, but fuzzy logic is not fuzzy itself. It is very precise. For instance, if we want to define the likelihood of climate risk occurrence, we use 5 linguistic terms: very high, high, average, low, very low. And the high means it happens once with over or about 90% within the indicated time frame, for instance, 5 years. And then we use evidence to combine the climate risk and cost to provide the decision support. A more reference can be found from a published paper. Then the third case, we use this spatial network and evidence oriented to deal with the road climate adaptation analysis for the UK case mainly. Methodological, I think this study improved compared to the previous study by horizontally extend the 3 parameters which I explained to 4, where we incorporate climate resilience. So apart from time frame, likelihood, consequence, we'll also take into account how resilient a transport infrastructure could be facing climate threats. For instance, in particular road in the UK, for the similar level of flooding, some road can provide or recover sooner than the other. So this element can better model the climate risk, at least for the UK case. The other methodological contribution was or lie in the vertical extension. early on, we described the consequence by simple 5 linked terms. Once we do the survey, we find out the experts sometimes feel difficult to give the overall judgment, because once we talk about the risk, consequence, or damage, it comes to the damage to the infrastructure, economic damage, the injuries or loss of life, and also damage to the environment, 3 major dimensions. So we separate the damage into a lower level where we can better collect the raw data from the domain experts. And given such a dynamic change, we need to, again, using more advanced model. So Bayesian come into help as demonstrated. Again, I think the journal, the paper has been published. If there's any interest for more information, it's certainly welcome to explore a bit more. Because of time limitation, I will not be able to go too deep about the real implications. So keep it as a modeling aspect. Having said that, I think for the 4th case study, we use simpler Bayesian model to deal with the real climate risk analysis in the UK. And I list the environmental drivers and also the climate threats and their ranking. Once we collect the national survey, I think is a large survey with a lot of feedbacks from different stakeholder groups, from the UK central government, DFT, to academics, to the operators. We have detailed analysis against different stakeholder groups, and we have the overall analysis. Again, for any interest, hopefully the publication at the bottom will be able to help. Well, I talk about a lot of uncertainties from the previous studies up to this stage. We received some criticisms from the review regarding the uncertainty and the reliability of subjective data. So we take in that lesson very seriously. We use a big data-driven evidential reasoning to deal with another study. We come back to the seaport one. And in this model, I think the outstanding element lies in every risk index is evaluated purely based on big data, the big database, which are, my understanding, openly available, thanks to the effort from the first author of the paper, Dr. Pu. And then we translated to the same plane for the risk quantification and synthesis. I think is another milestone for dealing with climate risk quantification from there. And the paper is just recently published. We talk about a lot of individual infrastructure climate risks, but nowadays we're seeing that goods moves through a supply chain and logistic perspectives. So I think that any individual element or infrastructure, even is facing a very high risk climate, its impact to the whole transport logistic chains may be minimal, while the other nodes or seaports or even ship, they have relevant low prioritized risk level. But if anything goes bad, the impact to the whole network will be very, very large. So how to deal with or strike a balance between the local level and the global level climate risks for regional adaptation from a whole transport network perspective, we are developing a further model by using complexity network theory and also a new definition for transport resilience. Again, I only provide a macro level information. I think the right-hand side figure to give a better understanding of transport resilience, it can certainly be interpreted depending on the scenarios and also the applications. Well, the left part is a very simple shipping network based on Maersk's line throughput data. It has a certain limitation. The first one is only based on the fixed static seaport as a node and the connection between seaport as the links. However, currently we're doing something else, which is much more advanced based on ship, because ship are also the research target for the climate risk once it's facing extreme weathers. How could we transfer a very mobile asset like ship to be a node? And the connection and the communication between ships as links is something we're working on. So that's number one for the future. Number two is about climate resilience to climate change. I think Theo Notteboom and other colleagues already mentioned very good concepts Again, I think it's also falling in our remit to explore the seafood and cold chains resilience. The work is being carried out by Dr. Poole at this moment. As I mentioned, a need to support to decision making. So there are few multi-objective and optimization decision making, including emergency, rescue, and the shipping route. One thing that is very interesting lies in for the previous optimization of shipping route, we always think that risk occurred, meaning a fixed value. But once we see in the flooding, storming, they're very dynamic. In the moment that we plan to send the rescue or emergency resources, the risk level may be low. But after you do the optimization, the risk level is increased for a particular node, decreased for another node. So how to combine and incorporate such a dynamic feature of risk development into optimization model is something that we're working on. At the last, because I really take and thanks the invitation from the committee, I think it's a brilliant platform for some possible collaborative work. Luckily, there is an ongoing project supported by European Research Council for sustainable and resilient container supply chains. And there is a global survey for port-centric transport network to climate change. And I sincerely invite any interesting party to work on together for possible findings of common interest. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Zaili. That was excellent, very comprehensive. And I really like to see the evolution of your methodology and your work over time, becoming more and more comprehensive and building more and more over time, and developing your research team with many different elements and different staff working in different directions. Unfortunately, we are really behind time, so we're going to move straight on to Naima. If